Hello, and welcome to another edition of Bill and Kipp's Excellent Bible Adventure, continuing our way through the Gospel of John, and today we're in the 10th chapter. And this is a time when we're looking at some of Jesus identifying himself in a very unique way, a way that oftentimes resonates with many of those of us who follow Jesus. And it's a joy to be with you and to be able to share this story. I'm Bill Brunson, and this is Kipp McClurg, and we're pastors here at Vestavia Methodist, and it's a joy to be able to study the Bible together and to share that with you. Today, we have our prop of the day, and it ties into the 10th chapter of John's Gospel. It's a shepherd's crook.
Yes, it kind of looks like the one from Charlie Brown. That was it. Linus that had it.
Yes,
yeah. And so, but that was really a tool that shepherds used in their trade.
Absolutely, you could use it to actually swing to fight if you had to fend off someone coming to steal sheep or bother the sheep, or a wolf or another natural predator. If the sheep got into an area that they didn't need to be in, you could use the crook part to actually grab them and pull them back. You could loop it around a leg and pull them back towards you if you needed. And so they were extremely handy. And they're still used by shepherds all around the world. It's one of those tools of the trade that there hasn't been a lot of improvement on. I mean, it's still sort of a symbol of the shepherd, but it's also a symbol for pastoral ministry.
Absolutely.
The shepherd's crook, because pastors are oftentimes thought of as the shepherd of the sheep of the congregation.
We have a flock.
Yes, and so this is our symbol as well. And
when a bishop processes into a church gathering, they often process with a shepherd's crook.
With a shepherd's crook. And yes, and so and this cost us nothing, because this was brought back to me by a group from one of the churches I served previously. They went off on a trip with educational opportunities, and they brought the shepherd's crook back to me as a gift.
So our accountants are going to be happy. We have not blown the budget.
That is right.
For special events.
We're still at zero.
That's right. So we're talking today in this chapter that Jesus says that he has another I am statement, and that he is the good shepherd. And he begins to share about how he is. Well, he uses some odd phrases. I'm the gate to the sheep.
Yes.
So you've kind of experienced some of that in your travels. So share a little bit about kind of what's the terminology mean for caring for sheep.
Well, when he says, I am the gate, in biblical time, one of the easiest ways to contain sheep at night, especially, when you're putting them in at night, and oftentimes you put them into a cave. You would put them into a cave area, and then you would simply pile rocks up in the front of the cave, closing it in, until you got to a span that was the same distance wide as the shepherd is tall. And that way at night, the shepherd would lay down in that space and would sleep, because that if anybody wanted to get in, they would go, they would have to literally step over the shepherd.
So it's kind of like, if you want to get to my sheep, you got to come through me.
That's right. That's right.
Literally.
And so Jesus says, at one point, he says, I am the gate, which means he's the one that's laying there. He's the one protecting the sheep. And that he goes into a lot of detail throughout this chapter about the fact if the one that is the thief or the wolf or the one that wants to hurt the sheep or steal the sheep, they go over the walls. They don't go over the gate, because they know the gate will not allow them. That person will not allow them. And that person is the shepherd. It's not a hired hand or someone like that that's really not invested in the sheep. It's not their sheep. The shepherd's going to be there because the shepherd's willing to do anything to protect the flock. One time when we were in Israel, we were actually hiking down Mount Arbel, which is a big mountain on the side of the Sea of Galilee. And we're coming down through this sort of winding road pathway, very narrow pathway. And suddenly, as I'm watching my feet to make sure I don't fall, I look up and I am face to face with a cow. Not what I was expecting. And
Not a Chick-fil-A.
No, not, wasn't telling me to eat more chicken.
That's right.
But it was a cow. And they were passing us because it was sort of dusk. It was getting a little dusk out into that time of day. And they were moving their cattle into the cave that we had just passed. And then they had the rocks in the sides, and they would move those rocks in, and then one of them was going to stay sitting in that. They had modern technology. They had a folding chair with them. And so they were going to sit in the middle of that cave entrance that they made, keeping their cows in the cave overnight.
And they did this all the time. So there were little places like this all around the countryside where the grass was green. And if you went there, you kind of knew that cave was there, and you could do that. And Jesus was born really into something like this.
Right. The area of the Galilee and all around Israel, you're going to have sheep.
Yeah.
And of course he's born in Bethlehem. And when he's born in Bethlehem, you are at Shepherd's Field, just right outside of Bethlehem. And so you have shepherds and sheep all over the hillside out and around Bethlehem when he was born there.
So Jesus says, I am the good shepherd. And I guess my gut says that he is trying to say that somebody else is not a good shepherd. And I would think by this point in the story, his conflict with the temple leaders is pushing him to say, look, you all are running the racket. Y'all are running the business. You're not really in this for the sheep.
Yeah.
But I am
a little bit like the hired hand.
Yeah, you're more the hired
story.
hand, and you know how to deal with the sheep, but they don't mean a lot to you. But I am the good shepherd. He eventually says, I and the Father are one. That really makes him upset.
It does.
But he's also kind of going back to the 23rd Psalm, where the psalmist says, "The Lord is my shepherd; I shall not want it." And takes care of me, leads me to green pastures and by still waters. And so Jesus is tying into the care that God has for the people, and sort of comparing that to really the hired hands who are running the religion in Israel, who don't really have that deep care for the people.
Right. When he says he is the good shepherd, he's saying that he has a connection to the sheep, that he has been with them constantly, and they know him, and they know that he will take care of them. And I love that passage that says that his sheep know his voice, and they don't listen to the other voices. They know his voice, and they follow him. And again, when we were there one day, and we were at the shepherd's field in Bethlehem, and there was an older shepherd who had a little flock of sheep, and then there was a young boy with a little flock of sheep, and basically their goal was to get us as the pilgrims who were there to give them $1, one of them $1, and they would allow us to hold a sheep in our hand, a little lamb in our hands, and get our picture made. And so you're holding a lamb at Shepherd's Field, that kind of thing. And it was really interesting because while they're standing there, both of them with a lamb, their sheep are all sort of intermingled on the road across from where we were parked. And when it got time for us to get on the bus to continue on to our next location, the little boy and the older gentleman both called out, and they both said something in Aramaic that I didn't understand, They both called out, and suddenly the sheep just that had been all together suddenly separated. And the shepherds, what really got me was the older man and the boy, neither looked back. They didn't stop and count. They didn't do anything. They simply called out. The sheep separated and started following their shepherd as their shepherd led them. And the shepherd knew that their sheep were with them. And that was an amazing moment to watch. And then I started thinking about how well do I listen to the shepherd's voice and follow, or do I, how often do I look for other options?
Right. And the importance of knowing God and taking time to get to know God's voice and God's purposes and God's values, so that as we walk life's journey, we can, as Paul said, I have the mind of Christ. I mean, that becomes native to us almost to go with where God's at. But here, the people were starting to believe Jesus. I mean, the man born blind, makes a statement, and it says he worships him. And so when it comes time to follow the shepherd, that man, and it sounds like many others, were starting to follow Jesus. And so the temple, those who were the Pharisees, they're sort of trying to figure out how to get rid of Jesus at this point, because he's threatening everything that is.
And he says that he is willing to lay down his life for his sheep and take it up again, and they just they don't know what to do with him. And so they start asking the question of, has he lost his mind? Is he demon possessed? And then again, they're sort of fighting in their own ranks, because others are saying, well, I don't think he's lost his mind, because what he says seems solid. And I don't think he's demon possessed, because we don't really believe that a demon-possessed person could actually heal a blind man.
Right.
And yet he did that. And so they're just struggling with what to do with him. But they know they need to do something.
Yeah.
And it's in this moment that while he's sort of in all of this idea of the Good Shepherd, that he's trying to get them to understand that I'm showing you the Father. You're seeing him in me. I'm doing what I do because the Father commanded me to do this. And yet they don't know how to handle that. They want to stone him again. They want to arrest him again. But they're also afraid of what that would do, and who's going to respond, and how people will respond to that. And it's just a challenge for the leaders in what to do with Jesus, who is now fully, blatantly, frequently connecting himself directly to God. I am Yahweh. I mean, it's beyond what they know to do.
But for us, and in our day, this passage is ever a reminder that Jesus is the Good Shepherd who cares for us and who's going to seek us out no matter where we're lost, and is going to care for us and make sure that we're provided for. And so no matter where we are in life, we can trust that He and the Father are the ones who care for us the most.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And just for to understand sort of the context of when all this is occurring in the life cycle of Jesus in his ministry, we know that Passover, we're in chapter 10, so Passover's coming up in just a couple of chapters, few chapters away. Jesus is actually in Jerusalem at this time because he is back in Jerusalem for the festival of dedication, which now it's called every December. It's called Hanukkah. He's there for Hanukkah, basically. He's for the festival of dedication. It's winter, and Jesus actually and the disciples do what A lot of people did that were more nomadic, like a traveling rabbi, as he is, sort of an itinerant rabbi, or the wealthy, those who actually had resources. Jesus, once he finishes the festival of dedication, he heads south and goes down to the area below Jericho, down to the Jordan River, down to the place where John had baptized him when everything was starting, when his ministry was beginning, and he encounters people that actually knew John. And they say, when John was here, he didn't really do miracles, he didn't do that kind of thing, but a lot of people followed him. But the one thing we know is everything he said about you is true. And they start to believe in Jesus. And so Jesus now is back down where it all began, and it's all about turn.
Yeah, it is almost this moment where it's kind of come full circle, but it's about to go toward the ending.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's almost, I like that he goes back to the beginning, and I always think and wonder, when he goes back into that region, like I say, the wealthier people would go to Jericho. Herod the Great built his winter palace in Jericho. He actually had 2 winter palaces right next to each other, both decorated exactly the same, so that he went back and forth between them so that no one would ever know where he was, because he was extraordinarily paranoid.
And there's an altitude difference.
Oh yeah.
So that in the winter you're a little bit lower altitude, so you're not as cold, and
right.
It's a little bit warmer.
Jericho's always sort of this much warmer, much more, much nicer climate. So people would go down there. But you can imagine Jesus. I wonder if Jesus goes down to the area of the Jordan where he was baptized, an area that's now called Qasr El Yahud. And if he goes down into that area, if he went down there and sat and remembered that moment and remembered the heavens opening and the dove descending and the words of his Father saying, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased," if he remembered that moment of affirmation and confirmation, if he needed that.
As if he were trying to once again recognize the voice of the Father.
Right. Before he goes back on that journey back to Jerusalem, where everything changes. For the good for us.
Yes.
But everything changes for him.
And so if in that moment he could hear the voice of the shepherd.
Right.
Himself.
What a beautiful image.